If someone had told me debt could look like gratitude and a yes that doesn't apologize, I'd have laughed. I'm Ava Sinclair, and a moment ago I signed the documents that officially closed my 12-year marriage. The pen felt heavier than it had any right to, scratching out my name across pages that pared my entire adult life down to legal jargon and property lines. Daniel had already hauled his things out last week, leaving only the ghost of aftershave and hollow spaces where his books used to sit. The house echoes differently now. Every footstep rings louder, bouncing off walls that suddenly feel too big for one person. Cardboard boxes line the hallway like tombstones, each one labeled in my neat architect's handwriting: kitchen, bedroom, office, as if I could pack away the memories as easily as the dishes. I sat in what used to be our kitchen, staring at the divorce decree. Final and irrevocable, the lawyer had said. Daniel took the cabin in the mountains. I kept the house in Riverton. Fair enough, considering he'd been screwing his secretary for the better part of 2 years. Monday morning hit like a freight train. Walking back into Calder and Wren Architects' architectural firm felt like performing in a play where everyone knew their lines except me. The receptionist gave me that sympathetic smile reserved for widows and divorcees. Tara from accounting actually patted my shoulder and whispered, "You're so brave, honey." Brave, right? If brave meant crying into my coffee every morning and sleeping in the guest room because the master bedroom still smelled like betrayal. "Ava, you've got a new client consultation at 2, my assistant Julian announced, barely looking up from his computer screen. "Some woman wants to renovate a Victorian, says money's no object." Thank God for work. Blueprints don't judge you for wearing the same blouse 3 days in a row. And structural calculations don't care if you've forgotten how to sleep through the night. At exactly 2 o'clock, she walked in. Lila Hart stood in my office doorway like she owned the place. Average height, maybe 5 feet 6 inches, but she filled the room with the kind of confidence that made you forget to breathe. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek bun that probably cost more than my grocery budget. And those blue eyes seemed to catalog every detail of my pathetic existence in about 3 seconds. "Miss Sinclair." Her voice had a slight rasp like she'd been laughing too hard the night before. "I'm Lila Hart. I hope you don't mind, but I've done my homework on you. Your restoration work on the Ashbourne Manor last year was extraordinary." She extended her hand, and when our palms touched, something electric shot up my arm. Not the cheesy romance novel kind of electric, but the real deal. The kind that makes you question whether you've been living your life all wrong. "Thank you," I managed, probably holding her hand longer than appropriate. "Please have a seat. Tell me about your project." She settled into the chair across from my desk with the grace of someone who'd never doubted herself about anything. Her silk blouse was the color of cream, and I caught myself wondering if her skin would be the same shade. Where the hell did that thought come from? "I bought the old Windermere place on Laurel Avenue," she said, pulling out a folder thick with photographs. 1890 to 3 Victorian original hardwood floors, 12T ceilings. "It's been empty for 5 years, but the bones are solid." She spread the photos across my desk, and I leaned forward to examine them. The house was a masterpiece of Victorian architecture, all gingerbread trim and bay windows. But it was the way she talked about it that caught my attention, like she was describing a lover instead of a building. "What's your timeline?" I asked, trying to focus on the professional aspects instead of the way her perfume made my head spin. "I'm flexible. I want it done right, not fast." She leaned back in her chair, studying me with those impossible blue eyes. "I have the feeling you understand the difference." Thursday afternoon found me standing in the foyer of Lila's Victorian masterpiece. My breath caught somewhere between awe and professional envy. The place was even more stunning in person than the photographs had suggested. Original mahogany banister spiraled upward like a wooden ribbon, and afternoon sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the dusty hardwood floors. "Impressive, isn't it?" Lila's voice echoed from the parlor. She emerged wearing jeans that hugged her curves and a cashmere sweater that made her eyes look bluer somehow. I fell in love with it the moment I walked through that front door. I pulled out my measuring tape and notepad, trying to maintain some semblance of professionalism. "The crown molding is original, I assume. And these medallions on the ceiling. Every last detail." She moved closer. Close enough that I caught that perfume again. Something expensive and intoxicating. "I want to restore it to its original glory, but with modern conveniences. Think you can handle that kind of challenge?" "Challenge?" The woman had no idea what kind of challenge she represented, just standing there looking at me like I might actually have answers to questions I'd never thought to ask. I live for challenges like this, I said, which was true enough. Historical restorations were my specialty, my passion. What I didn't mention was that Lila Hart was quickly becoming a different kind of challenge altogether. We spent the next 2 hours going through each room, discussing possibilities and practical concerns. She had vision. I'll give her that. Not the kind of client who wanted everything ripped out and replaced with whatever was trendy. She understood the soul of old houses, the way they held stories in their walls. This was probably the music room originally, she said, running her fingers along the built-in shelving. I'm thinking we restore these bookcases, maybe add hidden lighting behind the crown molding. Her enthusiasm was infectious. I found myself sketching ideas faster than I could think them through, caught up in her energy and the possibilities this house represented. It had been months since I'd felt this excited about a project. Hell, it had been months since I'd felt excited about anything. By the third week, our evening meetings had become routine. Lila would order dinner from whatever ethnic restaurant struck her fancy, and we'd spread blueprints across her kitchen table while discussing everything from load-bearing walls to window treatments. Somehow, the conversations always drifted beyond architecture. You never talk about your ex-husband, she observed one night over Thai takeout. Most people going through divorce can't shut up about it. I stabbed at my pad thai, buying time. Nothing much to say. He cheated. I filed papers. Life goes on. That simple? That complicated? I met her eyes across the table. What about you? Ever been married? Something flickered across her face, too quick to interpret. Not the marrying type, I suppose. I tend to scare people off with my intensity. She laughed, but there was something brittle about the sound. Like she was protecting herself from a joke, only she understood. It was nearly 10 o'clock when she walked me to the door. The spring air carried the scent of jasmine from her neighbor's garden, and somewhere in the distance, a dog was barking. Normal suburban evening sounds that somehow felt charged with possibility. Ava, she said, her hand on the doorknob. Thank you for what? For seeing what this place could become. For understanding why it matters. She stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the tiny gold flecks in her blue eyes. Close enough that when she reached up to brush a strand of hair from my forehead, her fingers lingered longer than necessary. Your coffee is getting cold, she murmured. But neither of us moved. The moment stretched between us like a held breath. Her hand was still in my hair, and I found myself leaning into the touch without conscious thought. This wasn't professional anymore. Hell, maybe it never had been. Lila, I started, but she was already pulling away. Early day tomorrow, she said quickly, opening the door. We should probably call it a night. I drove home through empty Riverton streets with my heart pounding and my hands shaking on the steering wheel. What the hell was happening to me? Friday evening brought me back to Lila's house, this time to finalize the kitchen renovation plans. She led me through the familiar rooms, but something felt different, more intimate. Maybe it was the way she kept glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. Or how our hands kept brushing when we reached for the same blueprints. I want to show you something, she said, leading me upstairs to what had been the master bedroom. She'd converted it into a studio of sorts with easels and photography equipment scattered around. But it was the photographs covering the walls that stopped me cold. Black and white portraits of women, beautiful women with haunting eyes and mysterious smiles. Some were artistic nudes, others captured intimate moments. A woman laughing in a cafe window, another reading poetry in what looked like a bookstore. All of them gorgeous. All of them looking at the camera with the kind of trust you only give to someone you care about. You took these? I asked, though the answer was obvious from the way she watched my reaction. Photography is my other passion, she said quietly. Or was, before I moved into interior design. I drifted closer to a portrait, a redhead with freckles and green eyes, laughing at some private joke. She's beautiful, I murmured. They all are. Lila's reply came softer, a vulnerability I hadn't heard before. Beauty calls to beauty. Don't you think? The question hung between us like a confession. I turned and really looked at her, and something in her expression sent my pulse skittering, recognition, understanding, the kind of moment that changes everything if you're brave enough to let it. Lila, I began, but she was already stepping toward me. Outside, rain had started needling the windows, building in force. We'd been so absorbed in our work neither of us noticed the storm rolling in. Lightning flashed, carving the room in stark whites, and thunder followed close behind. "Looks like you're stuck here for a while," she said, glancing at the glass. "That rain's coming down hard." We ended up in her living room with a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a special occasion. Conversation slid easier than it should have, given the current crackle between us. She talked about growing up in Fairview, about her first gallery show that no one came to, about the loneliness of living honestly in a world that doesn't always approve. I heard myself offering things I'd never said aloud, how invisible I'd felt in my marriage. How I'd suspected Daniel's affairs long before there was proof. How one day I woke to realize I'd been sleepwalking through my own life. "You know what the worst part was?" I asked, wine loosening the truth. "It wasn't the cheating. It was realizing I didn't even care anymore. That somewhere along the way I'd stopped feeling anything at all." "And now," she asked, setting down her glass and turning to face me fully. "Now I feel everything too much." The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we were ready to cross. Rain continued drumming against the windows, creating a cocoon of intimacy in her warm living room. She'd lit candles earlier, and the flickering light painted golden shadows across her face. "Ava," she said, and my name sounded different in her voice, softer, more important somehow. When she reached for my hand, I didn't pull away. Her fingers intertwined with mine, and I stared down at our joined hands like they held the answer to a question I'd been too afraid to ask. "I've been thinking about you," she whispered. "About us? About what this is?" "What is this?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Instead of answering with words, she leaned forward and kissed me. Soft at first, tentative like she was asking permission. But when I didn't pull away, when I actually found myself kissing her back, she deepened it. Her lips were soft and tasted like wine and possibility. When we finally broke apart, I was breathing hard and my heart was pounding so loud I was sure she could hear it. I started then stopped. "I mean, I've never been with a woman before." "I know," she said. Thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. "Does that scare you?" "Everything about this scares me," I admitted, but not in a bad way. In a way that makes me feel alive for the first time in years. She smiled then. The kind of smile that could light up entire cities. "Good. Scared means you're paying attention." The rain showed no signs of stopping, and neither of us suggested I try to drive home. Instead, we talked until nearly dawn, kissing occasionally when words weren't enough. Nothing went further than that. But everything had changed. I could feel it in the way she looked at me, in the way my skin tingled everywhere she touched me, in the way I suddenly understood what all those love songs had been talking about. Monday morning came too soon, and with it the panic. I sat in my office staring at blueprints that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. My mind replaying every moment of Friday night in vivid detail. The way Lila's lips felt against mine. The softness of her hands. The way she'd looked at me like I was something precious and rare. What the hell was I doing? I'd spent 38 years being Ava Sinclair, Daniel's wife, the woman who knew exactly what was expected of her. Now I was supposed to be what? A lesbian? The word felt foreign in my mouth, like trying on clothes that belonged to someone else. When Julian knocked on my office door with the morning's mail, I nearly jumped out of my skin. "You okay, boss? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired." I lied. Shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling. Long weekend. 3 days passed without contact with Lila. I told myself I was busy, buried in other projects that needed attention. The Henderson remodel was behind schedule, and the City Planning Commission wanted revisions on my commercial property design. Valid excuses for avoiding the woman who'd turned my world upside down with a single kiss. But Lila Hart wasn't the type to be ignored. Wednesday evening, she showed up at my apartment with Thai food and determination written across her face. She stood in my doorway wearing jeans and a leather jacket, holding takeout bags like peace offerings. "You've been avoiding me," she said matter-of-factly. "I've been busy." Bullshit. She pushed past me into my living room, setting the food on my coffee table with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "We need to talk." My apartment suddenly felt too small. Lila filled the space with her presence, making my carefully neutral beige walls and safe furniture choices look like what they were, a woman hiding from herself. "What happened Friday night?" I started, but she cut me off. "Was beautiful and real. And you're scared as hell, which I understand." She settled onto my couch, patting the cushion beside her. Sit. Let's figure this out together. I perched on the edge of the cushion, maintaining careful distance. I don't know how to do this, Lila. I don't know what you want from me. I want you to stop running away from something that could be incredible. Her voice was gentle but firm, like she was talking to a skittish animal, which I suppose wasn't far from the truth. I've never questioned who I was before, I admitted. With Daniel, everything was simple, predictable. I knew the rules. And look how well that worked out. Fair point. My marriage had been a masterpiece of following rules and meeting expectations, right up until it imploded in spectacular fashion. This is different, she continued, reaching for my hand. This is about what you want, not what you think you should want. What if I don't know what I want? Then we figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations, just see where this goes. She made it sound so simple, like attraction and desire were just decisions you could make logically. But there was nothing logical about the way my heart raced when she touched me, or how her smile made my stomach flutter like a teenager's. We ate dinner on my couch, talking about everything except the electricity crackling between us. She told me about her latest interior design client, a tech executive who wanted his entire house done in black and white. I shared horror stories about contractors who thought load-bearing walls were suggestions rather than requirements. Normal conversation, easy and comfortable, despite the undercurrent of unresolved tension. It was nearly 9 when she stood to leave, and I found myself not wanting her to go. Lila, I said as she reached for her jacket. She turned, eyebrows raised in question. Instead of speaking, I crossed the room and kissed her. Not the hesitant, questioning kiss from Friday night, but something deeper, more certain. Her arms came around me immediately, pulling me closer, and I melted into her warmth. This time, when she whispered my name against my lips, I didn't pull away. This time, I led her to my bedroom, my hands shaking with nervousness and anticipation. She was patient with my uncertainty, gentle with my inexperience. Her touch was nothing like Daniel's hurried, selfish grabbing. Every caress was deliberate, worshipful, designed to bring pleasure rather than take it. We moved together slowly, discovering what made each other gasp and sigh. She showed me what my body was capable of feeling. Sensations I'd never imagined were possible. The way she looked at me like I was something miraculous, made me feel beautiful in a way I'd never experienced before. Afterward, we lay tangled together in my sheets, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on my bare shoulder. Outside the city hummed with late-night traffic, but inside my bedroom felt like its own universe. How do you feel? She asked quietly. I considered the question seriously. How did I feel? Terrified, exhilarated, changed in some fundamental way that couldn't be undone. Like I've been sleepwalking my entire life and just woke up, I said finally. She smiled and kissed my temple. Good. That means you're paying attention. 3 weeks later, I was rushing through downtown Riverton with my mind completely elsewhere. Lila had texted me that morning about meeting for lunch, and I couldn't stop thinking about her smile or the way she'd kissed me goodbye at my apartment the night before. My whole world had shifted, and I was still learning how to navigate this new reality. The quarterly planning meeting at Calder and Wren Architects had run over, and now I was racing to make it to the lunch reservation Lila had made at that new farm-to-table place on Willow Street. I grabbed my keys and practically sprinted to my car, already mentally rehearsing my apology for being late. That's when I made the mistake that would change everything. I was so distracted thinking about Lila that I barely slowed down at the intersection of Pine and 3rd. The light had just turned red, but I was already committed to the turn. What I didn't see was the pickup truck coming from the opposite direction until it was too late. The collision wasn't dramatic, just a solid thump as my sedan's front bumper connected with the truck's side panel. Both vehicles came to a stop, and I sat there for a moment, heart pounding, wondering if I'd just ruined more than my afternoon plans. I climbed out of my car, already fishing for my insurance card and preparing to gravel. The pickup truck's driver was doing the same, muttering what sounded like colorful language under her breath. Are you okay? I called out, walking around to assess the damage. That's when I got my first good look at her. She was about my height, maybe a couple years younger, with shoulder-length brown hair and the kind of eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore work clothes, sturdy boots, and had the kind of presence that suggested she could handle whatever life threw at her. I'm fine, she said, kneeling beside her truck to examine the scratches. Looks like mostly cosmetic damage. You. Same here. I'm so sorry. I was distracted and didn't see you coming. She straightened up, and when she smiled, it transformed her entire face. Happens to the best of us. I'm Harper Wells, by the way. Ava Sinclair. I shook her offered hand, noting the calluses that suggested she worked with her hands. And again, I'm really sorry about this. Don't worry about it. These old trucks are tougher than they look. We exchanged insurance information, and I found myself oddly reluctant to end the conversation. There was something about Harper that put me at ease despite the circumstances. She had an easy confidence that reminded me of Lila, but without the intensity that sometimes left me feeling overwhelmed. I should let you get back to your day, I said finally, tucking her insurance card into my wallet. Actually, you know what? This is going to sound crazy, but I was just heading to the farmer's market. Want to grab coffee afterward? Make sure we're both okay. No delayed shock or anything. I glanced at my watch. Lunch with Lila was definitely off the table now. I suppose I could use some coffee. The Riverton Farmer's Market was in full swing. Vendors hawking everything from organic vegetables to homemade soap. Harper seemed to know half the people there, chatting easily with the woman selling honey and the man arranging bundles of fresh herbs. We ended up at the produce stand, where exactly one avocado sat lonely in an otherwise empty crate. That's the last one, Harper observed. I was going to make guacamole tonight, I said, reaching for it. Funny, so was I. Our hands touched as we both reached for the avocado, and I felt that familiar spark of connection. Different from what I felt with Lila, but undeniably present. Tell you what, Harper said, her fingers still brushing mine. How about we flip for it? Winner gets the avocado, loser buys coffee. Deal? She produced a quarter from her pocket and I called heads. It came up tails. Looks like I'm buying coffee, I said, surprised to find myself smiling. And I'm making guacamole. Fair trade. We found a quiet cafe near the market and over lattes and shared pastries. I learned that Harper was a carpenter who specialized in historic restorations. She'd grown up in Riverton, had been married once briefly in her 20s, and now lived alone in a cottage she'd renovated herself. What about you? She asked. What do you do when you're not rear-ending innocent truck drivers? I'm an architect. Actually, I specialize in historic restorations, too. Small world, very small. Maybe we've worked on some of the same properties. The conversation flowed easily, and I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in weeks. Harper had a gift for making people feel comfortable, asking questions that showed genuine interest without being intrusive. When she laughed at my story about a contractor who'd accidentally demolished a perfectly good wall, the sound was warm and infectious. I hate to cut this short, she said after we'd been talking for nearly an hour, but I've got a client meeting in 20 minutes. Of course. Thank you for the coffee, and again, I'm sorry about your truck. Don't be. Best accident I've had in years. She stood to go, then paused beside my chair. Ava, I know this might be forward, but would you like to have dinner sometime somewhere with better parking than downtown intersections? The question caught me off guard. A week ago, I would have politely declined, but something about Harper made me want to say yes. She was easy to be around, uncomplicated in a way that felt refreshing after the emotional intensity of my time with Lila. I'd like that, I heard myself saying. Great. I'll call you. She walked away with a wave, leaving me sitting in the cafe with a head full of questions and a phone number written on a napkin. By the end of that week, I felt like I was living in two different worlds that were bound to collide spectacularly. There was my world with Lila, full of passion and intensity and late-night conversations that left me feeling raw and exposed. And then there was this new world with Harper, comfortable and easy and surprisingly appealing. Harper called Thursday night. Her voice warm and familiar, even though we'd only met once. There's a blues band playing at the venue tomorrow night, she said. Nothing fancy, just good music and decent food. You interested? I should have said no. I should have explained that my life was complicated enough without adding another layer of confusion. Instead, I heard myself saying, that sounds perfect. Friday evening found me standing in front of my closet trying to decide what to wear on what might or might not be a date with a woman who wasn't Lila. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 weeks ago, the biggest decision in my wardrobe was whether to wear the blue blouse or the gray one to another mind-numbing dinner with Daniel's business associates. I settled on black jeans and a green sweater that brought out my eyes. telling myself this was just dinner with a new friend. Two professionals who happened to work in related fields, sharing a meal and some music. Nothing more complicated than that. The venue was everything Harper had promised. Intimate lighting, exposed brick walls, and a blues trio that made the room pulse with rhythm. Harper had already claimed a small table near the stage, and she stood when I approached, her smile genuinely pleased. "You made it," she said, pulling out my chair with old-fashioned courtesy. "Wouldn't miss it. This place is great." She wore dark jeans and a burgundy button-down that complemented her brown hair. And she looked relaxed in a way that made me feel relaxed, too. No artifice, no games, just Harper being herself. We ordered dinner and settled in to listen to the music. The lead singer had a voice like honey and whiskey, singing about lost love and second chances while the guitar wailed accompaniment. Harper tapped her fingers on the table in time with the beat, occasionally leaning over to share observations about the musicians or the crowd. The drummer's left-handed, she pointed out during a particularly complex solo. "You don't see that often." "How can you tell?" "Watch his dominant hand on the snare. It's all in the technique." I found myself studying her profile as she watched the band, noting the strong line of her jaw and the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. There was something solid about Harper, reliable in a way that made me want to trust her with things I'd never told anyone. "Can I ask you something?" I said during a break between sets. "Shoot, yesterday at the cafe. You asked me to dinner pretty casually. Do you always ask women out like that?" She laughed. A sound that managed to be both amused and slightly embarrassed. "Not always. Actually, hardly ever. But there was something about you that made me want to take a chance." "What kind of something?" "You look like someone who'd forgotten how to have fun. I thought maybe I could remind you." The observation hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. When was the last time I'd done something purely for pleasure? When had I last laughed until my sides hurt or stayed up too late just because I was enjoying myself? "Am I that transparent?" I asked. "Not transparent, just I recognized the look. I wore it myself for a while after my divorce." The evening passed faster than I wanted it to. We talked about everything, her work, restoring Victorian houses, my current project with Lila, though I carefully avoided mentioning the personal complications there. Harper told me about growing up with 3 brothers who taught her to throw a punch and fix a carburetor. I shared stories about my childhood as an only child who'd learned to entertain herself with books and sketch pads. "Your parents must have been proud when you became an architect," she said over dessert. "Following in their footsteps." Actually, they both died in a car accident when I was 22, just before I graduated college. Harper's expression softened immediately. "I'm sorry. That must have been devastating." "It was. But it also taught me that life's too short to waste on things that don't matter." "Is that what your marriage was? A waste?" The question was gentle yet unflinching, and I heard myself answer more honestly than I'd planned. "Not a waste, exactly, but not living either. More like inhabiting someone else's idea of my life." When the band wrapped their final set, Harper walked me to my car. The night was warm, scented faintly with honeysuckle from somewhere nearby. I fumbled my keys, suddenly unsure how to end the evening. "I had a great time," I managed, "true, but too small." "Me too. Maybe we can do it again." She stepped closer. For a second I thought she might kiss me. Instead, she tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear, her fingers lingering against my cheek. "Ava," she said softly, "I hope you know you deserve someone who sees how amazing you are." Before I could reply, she was already walking away, hands in her pockets, leaving me by my car with my heart pounding and my thoughts in a spin. The drive home slid by in a blur of streetlights and confusion. What was I doing? 2 weeks ago, my biggest worry was whether Lila and I were moving too fast. Now I was having dinner with another woman and feeling things I had no right to feel. I couldn't deny that Harper made me feel something different than I felt with Lila. Where Lila was fire and intensity, Harper was warmth and ease. Where Lila pushed me to interrogate everything I believed about myself, Harper made me feel like whoever I was right now was enough. As I pulled into the driveway, my phone buzzed. "Missing you tonight." "What are you up to?" From Lila. I stared at it for a long moment before typing, "Just got home from dinner with a friend." "Miss you, too." Not technically a lie, but it settled on my tongue like one. The next 2 weeks drifted past in a haze of guilt and second-guessing. I was living a split screen, Lila's fierce passion on one side, Harper's easy companionship on the other, telling myself it wasn't cheating because we hadn't defined anything. Each day, that rationalization felt thinner. Lila must have sensed it. She started asking small questions, about my calendar, about why I seemed distracted during our design meetings. Her renovation was almost finished, which should have felt celebratory. Instead, I dreaded the project ending. "You've been different lately," she said one evening as we reviewed the final kitchen layout. We were at her dining table with blueprints spread out, but neither of us was really looking at crown molding. "Different how?" I asked, though I knew. "Distant, like part of you is somewhere else." She reached across and covered my hand. "Talk to me, Ava. What's going on?" I should have told her then, about Harper, about the confusion chewing through me. Instead, I folded. "Just work stress. The Henderson project is behind, and the planning commission's being difficult about the zoning variance." She studied my face, clearly unconvinced. "Is this about us? About what we've been doing?" "No. Maybe. I don't know." The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "This is all new to me, Lila. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed." "Overwhelmed by what?" "By me." The hurt in her voice tightened my chest. "By everything. By feelings I don't understand. By wanting things I never thought I'd want." She squeezed my hand. "That's normal. When I first accepted who I was, it felt like the ground was always shifting under my feet." "If only it were that simple," I murmured. "If only the ground was shifting in just one direction instead of several at once." That's when she leaned forward and kissed me soft and reassuring. And I felt like the worst person alive because even as I kissed her back, part of my mind was thinking about Harper's easy laugh and the way she'd looked at me across the dinner table 2 nights ago. The truth came out the following Tuesday, and it was messier than I'd imagined it would be. Lila showed up at my office unexpectedly around noon, carrying lunch from our favorite deli and wearing the kind of smile that used to make my day. She'd been doing that lately, surprising me with little gestures that felt increasingly like attempts to recapture something that was slipping away. "Thought you might be hungry," she said, setting the bag on my desk. "Turkey and avocado, extra mustard, just how you like it." We were halfway through lunch when my phone rang. Harper's name appeared on the screen and I felt my face flush with guilt. "Aren't you going to answer that?" Lila asked, noticing my hesitation. "It's probably not important." But Lila had already seen the name on the display. Her expression shifted from curious to something harder to read. "Harper? That's an interesting name. Anyone I know?" The casual tone didn't fool me. Lila was sharp and she'd picked up on my discomfort immediately. "Just someone I met recently," I said, declining the call. "We had a minor car accident a couple weeks ago. And now you're friends?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. I could see Lila putting pieces together, connecting my recent distraction to a name she'd never heard before. "It's not what you think," I said, which was exactly the wrong thing to say. "What do I think, Ava?" Her voice had gone quiet the way it did when she was angry but trying to control it. I'd heard that tone once before when she told me about an ex-girlfriend who cheated. "Lila, let me explain." "Explain what?" "That you've been seeing someone else while I've been falling in love with you." The words hit like a physical blow. Love. She'd never said that before. And hearing it now in the context of this conversation made everything infinitely worse. "I haven't been seeing her." "Not the way you mean." "Then what way?" I couldn't answer that because I wasn't sure myself what Harper and I were doing. The dinners, the long phone conversations, the way my heart sped up when she smiled. None of it had a clear definition, which somehow made it feel more dangerous than if we'd simply been having an affair. Lila stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You know what the hell of it is? I can't even be properly angry because we never defined what this was. I just assumed." She trailed off, shaking her head. "You assumed what?" "That what we had meant something. That you felt even a fraction of what I feel for you." The pain in her voice was raw and immediate. I wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that what we had did mean something, that the last few weeks had been the most intense and transformative of my life. But the words stuck in my throat because how could I say all that while admitting I'd been drawn to someone else? "It does mean something," I said finally. "You mean something, but not enough to be honest with me." She gathered her purse and jacket, moving with the efficient grace of someone who'd had practice walking away from disappointment. "Lila, please don't go. Not like this." She paused at my office door, her back to me. I need some time to think about the project, about us, about whether there is an US. What does that mean? It means I might be done, Ava, with all of it. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving me alone with the wreckage of a conversation I should have initiated weeks ago. My sandwich sat half-eaten on the desk, and her perfume lingered in the air like an accusation. I sat there for a long time staring at my phone and the missed call from Harper, wondering how I'd managed to screw up the best thing that had happened to me in years. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to avoid hurting anyone, I'd ended up hurting everyone, including myself. Outside my office window, Riverton carried on with its Tuesday afternoon business, oblivious to the fact that my world had just fallen apart. That night, I sat on my couch staring at a glass of wine I hadn't touched, replaying the conversation with Lila over and over until my head hurt. Her words echoed in my mind. I might be done with all of it. The finality in her voice had been unmistakable, and I'd spent the last 4 hours wondering if I just lost the most important relationship I'd ever had. My phone buzzed. Harper's name appeared on the screen, and this time I answered. "Hey," she said, her voice warm and concerned. "You sound terrible. Everything okay?" "Not really." The understatement of the year. But I couldn't bring myself to explain the whole mess. "Want to talk about it? I could come over, bring ice cream and terrible movies." The offer was so quintessentially hope, so kind and uncomplicated that I almost started crying right there. "I'd like that," I said. She arrived 20 minutes later with Ben and Jerry's and a romantic comedy from the 90s that was so bad it was almost good. We settled on my couch and for a while I let myself pretend this was simple. That hope was just a friend offering comfort, not the catalyst for the disaster my life had become. "You want to tell me what's wrong?" she asked during a particularly ridiculous scene where the male lead was chasing the female lead through an airport. "I think I screwed up the best thing that ever happened to me. Work stuff, relationship stuff." I took a deep breath. "There's something I should tell you about why I've been so complicated lately." Harper muted the television and turned to face me fully. "Okay. I've been seeing someone. A woman named Lila. It's been intense and confusing and wonderful. And today she found out about you, and now she might be done with me entirely." I waited for Harper to look hurt or betrayed, but her expression remained calm, thoughtful. "You're in love with her," she said. It wasn't a question. "I think I am, but I'm also drawn to you, and I don't understand how that's possible. How can I have feelings for two people at the same time?" Harper was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her processing what I'd told her. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle, but certain. "Because feelings aren't logical, Ava. They don't follow rules or timelines or our ideas about how they should work. That doesn't make it right." "No, but it makes it human." She reached for my hand. "Can I tell you something?" I nodded. I knew about Lila. Maybe not her name, but I knew there was someone else. "You get this look sometimes, like part of you is somewhere far away. I figured you were working through something complicated and you didn't think to mention it. What would be the point? Either you'd figure it out or you wouldn't. Either way, I wanted to spend time with you." The simple honesty of it made my chest ache. "Harper. I'm sorry. I never meant to string you along or use you as some kind of distraction." "You didn't. These last few weeks have been great, Ava. Getting to know you, becoming your friend. I don't regret any of it. But I can see how you light up when you talk about her, even when you're trying not to. Whatever you and I have, it's not that. It's not the kind of love that changes everything." She was right and we both knew it. What I felt for Harper was real and significant, but it was comfortable love, safe love, the kind of feeling that made you content, but didn't transform you. What I felt for Lila was dangerous and consuming and absolutely terrifying. It was the kind of love that made you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. "I care about you," I said, squeezing her hand. "I care about you, too, which is why I'm going to tell you to fight for her." "What if she won't forgive me?" "Then at least you'll know you tried." "But Ava, if you let fear make this decision for you, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." We spent the rest of the evening talking. And somewhere during those hours, I found myself telling Harper things I'd never told anyone. About my marriage to Daniel and how it had felt like playing a role in someone else's life. About the loneliness that had followed me around for years like a shadow. About discovering with Lila that I was capable of feeling things I'd never imagined. It was nearly midnight when Harper stood to leave. At my front door, she turned and kissed me softly, a kiss that felt like goodbye and blessing and forgiveness all at once. For what it's worth, she said, I think she's lucky to have someone fight for her like this. Even if she doesn't want me to, especially then. After she left, I sat in my living room until sunrise, thinking about love and choices and the difference between settling for comfortable and reaching for extraordinary. By the time the sun came up, I knew what I had to do. I had to find Lila and tell her the truth. All of it. About Harper, about my confusion, about the fact that despite everything, she was the one I wanted to build something real with. I had to risk everything on the chance that love could survive honesty, even when that honesty came too late. The question was whether I was brave enough to actually do it. I spent the morning pacing my apartment, rehearsing what I would say to Lila, and discarding every speech as inadequate. How do you apologize for breaking someone's heart while you were figuring out your own? How do you ask for forgiveness when you're not sure you deserve it? By noon, I couldn't stand the waiting anymore. I drove to Lila's house, my hands shaking on the steering wheel as I pulled into her driveway. Her car was there, but when I knocked on the front door, there was no answer. I walked around to the back garden and found her sitting on the porch steps, a coffee mug in her hands and a suitcase beside her. My heart dropped. Going somewhere? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She looked up and I could see she'd been crying. The sight of her red-rimmed eyes made me hate myself all over again. Avalon, I got the Calder development contract. They want me to start next week. That's wonderful, I said, though it felt like the worst possible news. Congratulations. Is it wonderful? She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself like she was cold despite the warm morning. Because it feels like running away. Then don't go. The words came out more forcefully than I'd intended, and Lila's eyebrows raised in surprise. That's rich coming from someone who's been running away from this relationship since it started. You're right. I have been running, but I'm here now and I'm not going anywhere until we talk about this. What's to talk about, Ava? You made your choice. No, I didn't. I made a mess, but I didn't make a choice. I stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her blue eyes. My choice is you, Lila. It's always been you. What about Harper? Harper is a good person who helped me realize what I was too scared to admit. That what you and I have is extraordinary. And I was an idiot to risk losing it. Lila turned away, staring out at her garden where the roses were in full bloom. You hurt me. I know. You lied to me. I know. You made me feel like I was crazy for thinking what we had was special. It is special. It's the most special thing that's ever happened to me. And I'm sorry I was too much of a coward to tell you that before. She was quiet for so long. I thought she might not respond at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I fell in love with you, Ava. Completely, stupidly, head over heels in love. And when I realized you were pulling away, it felt like I was losing myself. You're not losing me. Not if you don't want to. She turned to face me then, tears streaming down her cheeks. How do I trust that? How do I trust you won't get scared again and run to someone else? Because I'm done running. Because I figured out the difference between settling for safe and fighting for what matters. I reached for her hands, relieved when she didn't pull away. Because I love you, too, Lila. I love your passion and your intensity. And the way you make me feel like I'm capable of being someone I never thought I could be. Ava, I love how you look at old buildings like they're hidden treasures waiting to be found. I love the way you make coffee, like it's a craft, not a routine. I love that you notice beauty where most people don't. My voice wavered on the last part. I love you, and I'm sorry it took me this long to be brave enough to say it. For a breathless beat we simply faced each other while morning sun sifted through the trees and birds sang somewhere beyond the yard. Then Lila stepped in and kissed me, urgent, certain, packed with everything we'd both been too afraid to speak. When we finally broke apart, she rested her forehead to mine. The Avalon job, she said. Take it if it's what you want. I'll figure out long distance. And for the first time since I'd arrived, her mouth curved, you could come with me. Plenty of firms in Avalon would be lucky to have you. The idea should have rattled me. Uprooting my life to follow a woman to a new city was exactly the sort of impulsive move the old Ava would never have considered. But the Ava who decided love was worth the risk felt a spark of exhilaration. Are you asking me to move in with you? I'm asking you to take a leap of faith with me. 6 months later, we stood in the entry hall of our renovated Victorian in Avalon's historic district. watching the photographer catch the last frames for Heritage Living magazine. The feature showcased our collaboration, how architectural restoration and interior design could braid together into something remarkable. The article's going to be gorgeous, Lila said, sliding an arm around my waist. We did good work. We did good work, I echoed. All around us, the house testified to what becomes possible when two people stop fearing what they want and start building it, original hardwood gleaming beneath thoughtfully chosen fixtures. Afternoon light pouring through restored stained glass and scattering rainbows across the walls. But more than a project, it was home, our home. The place where we'd learn the everyday negotiations of two strong-willed women, how to share space, dreams, and a future neither of us had pictured at the start. I have something for you, Lila said, producing a small wrapped box from her pocket. Inside lay a vintage brass key, aged, imperfect, beautiful. It's from the original front door, she explained. Before we changed the lock. I thought you should have it. Why me? Because you showed me that sometimes the most beautiful things are the ones that have been broken and put back together. She kissed my temple. And because you're the key to everything I want my life to be. I turned the little key in my palm and thought about locked doors, second chances, and the courage it takes to be seen, completely. The woman I'd been a year ago wouldn't have recognized the woman I am now. That Ava tiptoed around her own desires, content to live in the margins. This Ava is learning to live in full color. I love you, I said, the words easy now, practiced by months of truth. I love you, too. Outside, Avalon hummed with evening traffic and the promise of tomorrow. Inside our restored Victorian, surrounded by what our hands and hearts had made, everything felt exactly right.